Hello, good afternoon. A warm welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining in person for this deep dive session. Uh, I am Leo Chris Palau, Climate Adaptation Focal for the Agriculture, Food, Nature, and Rural Development for Central West Asia, and also supporting the wider adaptation agenda of ADB in other regions. Uh, I will be guiding you in this program for the deep dive session on mainstreaming climate resilience into investment projects to support food security. So good morning, good afternoon to all. Uh, so today's deep dive session will focus on integrated approaches in building climate resilience systems for the AFNR sector using case studies in four countries: Georgia, Tajikistan, Pakistan, and Uzbekistan. Just to mention that the AFNR sector is conducting upstream assessment, upstream climate work in almost all DMCs in Central and West Asia, but these four countries were selected because of the progress and advances made in terms of the analytics and the engagement with the counterparts. To formally open today's program, may I invite Ms. Yasmin Siddiqui, Director of Agriculture, Food, Nature, and Rural Development, to deliver the opening remarks. Ms. Yasmin Siddiqui is a chartered civil engineer from UK and has a postgraduate degree in irrigation engineering. She has over 25 years of experience in natural resources management, including integrated water resources management, irrigation, knowledge solutions, and leading teams at Asian Development Bank. She is currently the Director of Agriculture, Food, Nature, and Rural Development Sector Group, covering operations in Central and West and South Asia departments.
Hey, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to all of you. On behalf of the Asian Development Bank, firstly, let me express my appreciation to all of you for gathering here today for this event, which is a subject very dear to my heart because I think it's a critical area of our support for our developing member countries. It's a pleasure to organize this event and share ADB's role in supporting our partners in mainstreaming climate actions into the national and regional development agenda. So ADB is working very hard with our developing member countries to solidify our role as Asia and the Pacific's climate bank. We recognize that our central role and commitment to support our DMCs in tackling climate change and building climate and disaster resilience, also in enhancing environmental sustainability. And this is one of the key areas of our operational priorities under our Strategy 2030. We're very much committed to supporting accelerated climate action by elevating our ambition to deliver $100 billion worth of climate financing to our developing member countries by 2030. And of that 100 billion, 34 billion is targeted for adaptation and resilience. ADB is taking a cooperative, regional, and intersectoral approach to achieve development goals and climate ambition. And we're working closely with the countries to ensure a coordinated effort to accelerate progress in their commitment to transition to climate resilient and low carbon economies. I'm pleased to welcome you to this deep dive session, which is part of this Food Security Forum on mainstreaming climate resilience into investment projects. So a lot of this is really going to be presenting some of those more grounded, practical approaches to how do we develop and build in climate resilient solutions into our operations. We have a wide range of examples that will be presented today on looking at how we build resilience into water resources and the impacts as well of climate on agri-food systems, economic development, and food security and nutrition. In this session, the speakers will also highlight the initiative of ADB in Central and West Asia region in developing strategic climate risk assessment, with a particular emphasis, as Leo mentioned already, on Georgia, Pakistan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan, where we have initiated this approach of looking at upstream climate risk assessment. And through these assessments, ADB has opened opportunities with our clients to engage on identifying climate impacts, also looking at the emphasis of where we need to place it in our operations, and having much more resilient and robust pipelines for investment. In my opinion, and I'm going off script here, Leo, hope you don't mind. In my opinion, this has been really one of the most pioneering pieces of work. And we're really keen to see that this type of effort, which is done on the upstream side, is replicated in other regions across ADB's developing member countries. And I see one of our colleagues from Lao resident mission. So I'm really pleased that you're here and that you will also be able to take some of these ideas back to your government counterparts and share with them what could be achieved. For me, importantly, why this approach is different is in that it identifies a much more comprehensive approach and helps us work towards the full adaptation projects which are premised really around climate resilience, rather than what we have been doing in the past, which is really looking at climate proofing, more specific interventions. So in this comprehensive approach, we can really tackle climate risk in a much more, in an approach with the government that can identify a number of interventions where ADB and other development partners can provide a more comprehensive support. The speakers will emphasize that integrated approach to developing resilience-focused and stakeholder-centric investment projects. And I'm pleased that there will be that presentation around the community and stakeholder engagement, which is critical to also looking at community resilience building, which often we may forget or overlook because we're quite interested in the infrastructure development aspects. So I wish you all a productive engagement today and an opportunity to learn from the approach that's been pioneered by the team who is going to present today. And I thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Yasmin Siddiqui, for highlighting the importance of ADB's integrated approach as leverage to orient banks' investment pipeline towards accelerating climate action. Moving forward, the series of presentations will showcase the case studies in 4 DMCs in Central and West Asia. For the first speaker, let me introduce Ms. Kathleen Cobales, who will be presenting the result of the upstream work in Georgia on climate change assessment for the Karek Water Pillar, risks, adaptation, and early project concepts. Kat Cobales is a climate change officer under the Central and West Asia Department, Environment and Natural Resources of ADB. Prior to her employment in ADB, she served as the climate change attaché at the British Embassy Manila. She also has over a decade of experience as a development worker, specialist as part of the National Economic and Development Authority of the Philippines, where she headed a division that deals with environment and climate change. Kat has a degree on forest and nature conservation from Wageningen University and Research Center, and a Bachelor of Science degree in forestry from the University of the Philippines. Kat, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Let me first try. Okay. Many thanks, Leo, for the introduction. And again, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for joining us in this session. So as mentioned by Leo, I will be presenting to you the first case study in Georgia. So basically, what we did is a climate risk assessment for the entire country. So for this one, this shows you the methodology. So as mentioned, for the study, it looks into first the climate risk assessment work And then under that sphere, what we did was looking at the different climate hazards that affects the area, as well as looking into the water balance assessment, particularly for the eastern side of the country. So that findings resulted into development or identification of adaptation and resilience measures. And then it will then inform the development, as mentioned by Yasmin earlier, of climate resilient and more responsive investment program for the region. So as mentioned, we covered the entire country. But what we did, or what the team did, was to look into two splits. The first one is the split between the river basins, or the major river basins. The west is draining to the Black Sea, and then the eastern part is the side draining to the Caspian Sea. And then another split or subdivision would be the mountains as well as the lowlands. So that gives us 4 hydrological regions. Because just to mention that for this study, what we focus on is more on the water part, which is also linked, of course, very useful to agriculture. So just to introduce to you what the Eastern Mountains cover. So this one refers to the portion of the Greater Caucasus Mountain Range and the Lesser Caucasus Range, which is located to the Kura-Aras Basin, which is in the east side of the water divide. And then for the Eastern Lowlands, this is located in the Kura Valley between the eastern mountains of the southern Shida Kartli province, or the plains to the east of the western mountains in the Kakheti region. And then for the western mountains, this is consisting of a large part of the autonomous republics of the Adjara and the Abbasiya in the northern areas of Samagrelo, Semo Seveneti, and the Racha Lokumi and Kevo Seveneti regions. I just need to mention the names just to make sure that later on when I describe the different risks in the area, you know which locations are these. And then for the western lowlands, this consists of the large part of the Goria and Imereti and the southern Samagrelo, Semo, Seveneti regions. Doesn't work. Oops, sorry, I couldn't see. There. So first, in terms of the approach, I'm sure you will see this in many of the presentations later on. This is a framework from the IPCC, from the AR, or the Assessment Report 6. So basically, it looks at risk as a function of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. So looking into that, in terms of the hazards that were considered in the area, it's basically flooding, landslides, drought, heat wave, and wildfire. And then in terms of the exposure, you can see there that it basically driven by location. And here, the points of interest that we looked at are irrigation and drainage systems, storage dam, water supply, as well as rural roads and hydropower power plants. So for the vulnerability, it looks into sensitivity factors as well as the adaptive capacity. So in the context of the study, which focuses on water, it looks into the water quality and quantity, which will then be influenced by, like for instance, economic activities, also the change in temperature, or the change in population, because as you all know, if there is an increase in population, the demand for water would be required. And also, it also looks into the economic activities. Like for instance, there are many purposes for water supply which are competing, that includes irrigation. So the succeeding slides, I will share with you the different climate impacts. So the first of which would be the river floods, which is very important because this really considered where the location of the area and the extent of the floodable area, or like for instance, what would be the areas that would be affected, particularly if it is near the river system. And as you can see here, in the entire country, there are two areas that would be very highly susceptible to flood hazards, and which you can also see on the screen at the moment. So here, these are the outlet of the Nguri River, which is draining to the Black Sea, as well as the Ayori River in the eastern lowland area. So as you can see here, in terms of the severity and the area that will be affected by flood, it will be mainly in the eastern lowlands. And then here, another important risk would be heat waves, which will be the measure of the occurrence of the extreme temperature. Of course, it will be driven by the changes in the mean temperature as well as the land use. So here, the worst affected region by the potential heat wave hazard would be the western lowlands. Oops. Yes, sorry. So we have identified a number of risks. So this is the third one, which is on drought. So for the drought, this is mainly assessed through the FAO's Agricultural Stress Index. And then in terms of the result, you can see here that in Georgia, the drought result really varies between medium and low to medium hazard category. And as you can see on the screen, the medium hazard category is basically confined in the eastern lowlands. Next important risk would be landslide. As you all know, in Georgia, this is really a very mountainous country with very complex terrain. And here, it's really critical to look into this particular hazard, particularly once it is affected by the intensity of rain, and then it basically will affect the infrastructure and other relevant agricultural activities in the area. And as you can see here, in terms of the most vulnerable or most impacted areas, you can see that the mountain regions, both in the east and the west, are highly at risk. And then in terms of the reservoir, this is very much seen in the entire Georgia because, as you know, this is an important initiative or intervention to store and supply water for many uses, including domestic as well as irrigation and other industrial purposes. So here we have 7 major reservoirs that we look into for irrigation purposes, which is very important for the sector. So here it just show you that in terms of the reservoir with the highest capacity, it's Shawnee and also the Tbilisi reservoir. So another important risk would be the irrigation and drainage. So for this, these are the western floodplains of the Nguri and Rioni rivers, which are actually large agricultural areas, and most of the regions, particularly at the upstream part, these are mainly irrigated, and for those at the downstream, these are mainly drained. So for the next slides that I will show you, these are the adaptation measures that were identified. So here, the adaptation measures were informed by the risk assessments that I showed you in the previous slides, as well as here I will zero in to the focus areas, particularly in the west, we looked into the Colquete region, and in the east, we're looking at Ayori or Alisani River Basin. So for this particular context, you can see that the western and the eastern side of Georgia, they are currently experiencing very different climate externalities or climate realities, where in the west, this part is very much it has more water, so it is abundant in terms of water. And in the east, this is the area where it is experiencing water scarcity. So for this area in the west, this is an important part. This provides an important consideration or a contribution in the agriculture sector, since this supports the crops related, which include hazelnuts, citrus, and grapes. And in terms of for instance, the climate projections, this area will very much experience climate variability, heat stress, and also there is seen as concern on landslide as well. So considering all those risks that it will face, it will then inform the adaptation and resilience measures that were that later on you can see. Actually, here you can already see on your screen. So here you can see that there are 3 types of measures that we are proposing. One is on the adaptive water management, because here the problem, as mentioned, is the abundance of water. So there is really a need to make sure that there will be a storage. There is storage for the excess water for extreme precipitation and other extreme events. And then you can also see the ecosystem-based adaptation and also climate-resilient development. So here you can see that it's not just about infrastructure measure, but there are also a combination of forest protection and other conservation-related measures. So for the eastern part, I'm showing to you this scenario on the water assessment, because as mentioned, this part of Georgia will experience scarcity, or currently experiencing water scarcity already. And as you can see, based on the projection, it will experience less water by 12% in 2030, and it will further increase to negative 23 by 2050. So these are important considerations in making sure to promote adaptation and resilience measures. This is just to show you another scenario. This is just to show you another scenario where we show that if we do implement measures like, for instance, storage development, as well as a combination of storage and rural development, you can see that from the expected 23% decrease, it will reach to only 10% if there are storage development measures that will be implemented. And you can see that if you combine storage and rural development, you can see that there is now the balance. For the eastern part of Georgia, so as mentioned, this is the dry part of the region. So in terms of the interventions here, you can see the reservoir rehabilitation, irrigation scheme modernization, water accounting, capacity building. So these are measures to measure the level of water, as well as making sure that there will be storage for future water requirement. And then again, there is also a set of ecosystem-based solutions, wherein it's not just the infrastructure measures that would be required, but there are also conservation measures that are necessary. And as mentioned earlier by Yasmin, for the climate resilient or rural development, it considers both the crop management as well as providing livelihood to the communities. Well, to conclude my message, for this one, you can see here that in terms of the adaptation measures, these are not just focused on mainly on infrastructure activities, but it will provide, or it offers, a combination of solutions that looks into the downstream and the upstream interventions. It also includes some policy initiatives and policy reforms that are necessary to to be integrated, to be able to provide a more holistic approach in addressing the climate risks that were identified. And as mentioned by Yasmin, this is an effective way for us to identify investment projects based on a more systematic identification and based on the future climate projection, incorporating future climate projections as well. So I believe that ends my presentation. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kathleen Cubales, for sharing the interesting work in Georgia. Our next presenter, Mr. Matthias Leitner, will highlight the case study in Tajikistan through his presentation on enhancing climate resilience in the Pianch River Basin, climate change assessments, and preparation of the climate change adaptation investment projects. Mr. Matthias Leitner is an agriculture and natural resources economist working for the Asian Development Bank. He focuses on design and implementation of agribusiness, value chain, and water resources projects. His particular interest lies in climate-smart agriculture, digital farming, and ways to engage youth more meaningfully in the sector.
Can everyone hear me? Perfect. All right, thank you. So I'm presenting a case study similar to the one in Georgia for Tajikistan. Rather than focusing on the entire country, we focus on just the river basin. Why are we doing such an approach? And it's really a new type of approach that we're taking in designing projects. Usually, we look at climate change and climate risk assessment at the concept, if we're lucky, but more on the design phase. So we have an existing project design, an idea, and then we're doing all the assessment, including the climate assessment, and kind of informing our project. What we are proposing and what we are doing now in a lot of our countries is flipping the climate story around. We start with an upstream climate assessment. We look at where the vulnerabilities are, and then we're building our project concepts on top of that climate story. So we're putting climate really front and central to all our investment project, rather than it being an afterthought. So that's kind of like this new idea that we're really trying to, we're trying to make sure that climate change is being adequately addressed in our development projects. What we did in Tajikistan is take more of a holistic approach. So we didn't only look at water, we looked at a couple of indicators. So we looked at the prevalence of poverty, soil productivity, temperature changes, change in rainfall, and so on. And we created GIS maps of those different indicators and kind of overlaid them to create a heat map, no pun intended, of where the most sensitive areas are in the country. And that gives us two information. A, it gives us information of what kind of activities we can potentially do. But when we're engaging with the government, we can already shortlist some areas, because sometimes government have their own agenda, they have their own political idea what kind of areas they want to go to. And with such an analysis, we have a better point for discussion if we can say, look, these are actually the areas that are most vulnerable, both to climate change, but also some socioeconomic indicators. So that's what we pilot in Tajikistan. So we're looking a little bit more broadly across different indicators. And we not just looked at agriculture and forestry and water resources. I mean, that was the prime focus, but we also looked at some other sectors, including transport, energy, health, and so on, because obviously on the ground level, on a farm level, these issues get muddled. The farmer might have issues with transportation, he might have issue with energy, he might have issue with soil moisture. So there are a lot of issues that we kind of have our silo goggles on. But a lot of those issues are, across different what we call sectors, all combined present at a field level. So in the climate vulnerability assessment, we looked at all these kind of sectors, obviously particular focus on agriculture and water, but we combined that with a socioeconomic survey. So we did key informed interviews, focus group discussions, to really understand what the vulnerabilities are, how climate change is being perceived in rural communities, because a lot of studies, they might not, or they give us false information, especially when it comes to inter-household impact of climate change. Women might be stronger impacted by climate change. Other vulnerable groups, youth, elderly, might be differently impacted by climate change. So by doing a socioeconomic survey, combining that with the climate vulnerability assessment, we get a more holistic picture of where the pockets of issues are. And based on that, we're building then our project pipeline. And then thirdly, we look at obviously what the government priorities are and policies. So all of the assessment that I've been mentioning was obviously a consultative process with the government. So we're looking at what their priorities are, what their areas of interest are, and we're combining that with the climate vulnerability assessment and the socioeconomic surveys that we have been doing. I don't want to go too much into the climate change impacts because we're quite aware of what's happening. But basically, we did the analysis of where the climate change impacts are, what they are, and looked at key sectors. Obviously, water, agriculture for us is the most important one. But we also looked at some landscape issues in terms of organic matter in the soil, biodiversity loss, habitat loss, because a lot of those issues are present and there's a cost attached to these kind of issues. So looking at soil health, soil salinity, all these kind of more landscape issues gives us a more holistic approach of the picture of what's the problem in the key sectors. So after we had the climate change impact, after we looked at what the impacts are of key sectors, we then looked at key adaptation issues. And we kind of started grouping them. Obviously, we're from the agriculture and water resource natural development side. We looked at these elements specifically. But the important part is also, again, thinking a little bit outside the box, looking at cross-sectoral issues and how we can combine them. That could be looking at the catchment area, how to improve soil retention, how to improve water retention, soil fertility, and so on. So to kind of, again, look a little bit across our boxes and our silos to identify those kind of issues. So what we did then, after we had all that information, we again engaged with the government and we grouped them into themes. So it's a long list of different priorities. And then with that list, we went back to the government and started discussing with them on how to shortlist our priority areas that we can then focus on and provide our investment to them. So these are the criteria and sub-criteria, as I was saying. Obviously, the climate risk assessment is one of the main criteria that we've been using. We're looking at different strategies. There's also the Pianch River Basin Management Plan that was developed by ADB and together with the government. So we're looking at different policies and strategies. We're looking at the issues that were flagged at the socioeconomic surveys and stakeholder consultations. And we're looking at what are the quantifiable benefits and costs, because when we engage with the government, especially with the Ministry of Finance, I mean, they always ask us, what is the cost? What is in for us? If we invest $1, what's the return? If we cannot provide that, because it's also a little bit abstract for them, if we just talk about temperature increase, reduction in water, especially the Ministry of Finance, they also do like hard numbers and dollar values. So we also looked into pinpointing a little bit more the associated cost to it, either cost to GDP, reduction of GDP, or what a potential investment could actually yield in benefit, to then again engage with the government. So after that exercise, we came to a list of priority projects. Not important what they are, it's basically we created that short list that ADB could pick up, other development partners could pick up. But each of these priority projects address a specific climate risk that we have identified during the analysis, and it also addresses some of the socioeconomic issues that we have seen. And in the presentation to the government, we also kind of have a pre-concept paper developed for each of the projects. So that helps us with the pipeline, and it helps the government also have kind of a roadmap of the potential investments in agriculture, food, nature, rural development, either by ADB, but all of these projects are really, climate change is front and center and really addressing a specific climate risk. Thank you very much.
So for the next, thank you, Mr. Matthias Leitner, for demonstrating how upstream climate work can be translated into investment projects and deliver the intended adaptation benefits to vulnerable communities. Our next speaker is Mr. His Jamali. He will present their work in Pakistan to support local communities in recovery from the severe flooding that hit the country very recently. His presentation is entitled Aligning Food Security Investments with Climate Goals in Post-Flood Khyber Pakhtunkhwa in Pakistan. His Jamali has recently joined Asian Development Bank as Senior Climate Change Officer. As regional climate focal for Pakistan and Afghanistan, he provides technical support to the development, implementation, and coordination of ADB's climate change agenda. Prior to joining ADB, he was a senior research scientist at Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization, CSIRO, in Australia, providing scientific leadership to government and industry partners in environmental, agriculture, and food sectors. Mr. Jamali holds a PhD from the University of Melbourne, Australia, where he investigated methane and carbon dioxide exchanges in the tropical savannas of Australia. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I think I'll take you a bit further down from the upstream, what Matthias really nicely explained, and Kate before that. I'll just talk about a project that's already matured and it's been approved. It's hit the ground now. So I would like to just take you through the process and also show that when we develop a project, it's not always a linear process, or when we say project cycle, it's not a perfect circle. And this is the project details. That's it's in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa or KP province, which is in the northwest of Pakistan, bordering Afghanistan. It's the total cost of this project is $83 million, and it will start. The implementation period has started from this January for next 4 years, and it will cover 7 flood-affected districts. So just to give you a bit of background, KP province is characterized by low productivity, agricultural productivity compared with other provinces. For example, its significantly, its production of wheat is significantly short of its demand, and which means it spends a lot of its capital in importing wheat from other provinces and possibly overseas as well. And to keep the productivity up and going, government provides significant amount of subsidies in fertilizers and seeds to the farmers. And this was made worse by the flood that we had in 2022, these figures on the right side, these are from an upstream assessment called PDNA, or Pakistan Disaster Need Assessment, which was done by multiple agencies, including World Bank, ADB, and UN agencies. When we are developing this project, a lot of the data from those assessments were used as well. So these floods not only destroyed the summer crop, because we do get mainly floods in summer, but also the seed that was stored for the winter crops, which was again significantly affected because most of the farmers we are talking about, they are small farmers and they are not very affording. So many of them couldn't really afford to grow wheat because they couldn't purchase more seed. So, of course, half of the districts in KP were affected by flood. So how do we, there were 2 approaches we can take, which districts we target. We target all the districts and have a small impact, or we select a narrow subset of districts, and then we have a greater impact in those. I think we went with the later impact, and the criteria you can see in green we looked at the flood damage intensity. The data was available from that disaster need assessment. Then to see because we are essentially talking agriculture, so what was the production share in those districts? If a district okay, it has been impacted by floods, but the impact is mostly on infrastructure and not on agriculture, so that's not our area of focus, of course. And again, the share, the population share. Of course, we are not supporting land, we are supporting people. So what is the population intensity in those areas? So using these criteria, we selected 7 most impacted districts. And then we targeted those, and I think I won't go into detail of all the process we do of climate change risk assessments because my colleagues have already covered that. But I think just to very quickly, we of course as a part of the project development process, we do climate risk screening, and then we, if it is for this project, it was a medium risk, so which means we have to do full-scale, detailed climate risk assessment. But that means we are doing it just for those 7 districts, which we are our focus, so that we can these assessments can inform our project interventions. So I think when we develop those the project interventions, we, as part of that, we also calculate climate finance, how much of the interventions we are doing count as climate finance, and then we further divide it into how much of that has went into adaptation and how much went into mitigation, so that you can see those numbers, 45% in adaptation and 10% in mitigation, roughly. And then when we finalize those interventions, we also make sure that these interventions align with the Paris Agreement, and this follows a MDB Paris Alignment Framework. And mainly it constitutes, there is what we call them universally aligned lists. So it has a list of activities that are, if these interventions we are proposing are included in those lists, we consider it aligned. And the interventions we are proposing, there is another list called universally non-aligned list. It shouldn't be in those. Those activities are not allowed. For example, you can't build a coal power project anymore with ADB funding. And then the second part of this Paris Agreement alignment is alignment with the adaptation goals. And again, over here, we made sure that the interventions address the risks that were identified as part of the climate change risk assessment. And this Paris alignment assessments also looks at how the interventions are aligned with the national policies and regional policies, particularly the NDCs. This is just a quick list of the interventions. So in the green, these are the activities that are targeted the farmers. So that investments directly goes to working with farmers. And then in the orange, these are the ones which are strengthening the institutional preparedness. So in a way, what we are doing in this project is it's part recovery and part adaptation. So we are trying to support the farmers who have already been impacted in 2022 floods, but we are also trying to increase their resilience for future disasters, similar or different. So we are addressing both. So in green, we are trying to, I won't go into explain all the detail, but I just highlight the few which are high impact. For example, in the farmer side, we are training them into adopting the climate resilient agronomic practices. Now that, for example, how to manage their pests and there is the affordability of them for a fertilizer is a big issue. So as one of the trainings we are included, for example, composting the manures. And similarly, I think when we talk about recovery from the last impacts of the last flood, so provision of high yielding varieties for farmers, because they can keep using that recycled seed for at least 3 years and get high yields, and of course provide some fertilizers. And I think on the institutional preparedness side, so I think one of the most impactful activities we are going to do is the registration of farmers. We will cover all the farmers in the whole province. Although we will only work with, through this project, we will only work with the farmers that in the selected 7 districts. And I think what this will do is it will not only have an impact for delivering these subsidies or support that were identified in this project, but in any future, for example, if there is another flood next year, government will know exactly where the farmers are, what crops they are growing, so that they can provide targeted support. And that's been strongly advocated by all financial institutions to Pakistan, including IMF, World Bank, and Asian Development Bank. So I think this activity will go a long way in providing targeted support to farmers. We're supporting the crop reporting services. This is a department within the agriculture which looks at which estimates the crop area under different crops, and government uses that to make estimates of how much food they're producing. But they're using old methods of field visits and sampling in the areas. So in this one, we are going to introduce the GIS and remote sensing so that this can be done more efficiently and more accurately with less human error. And the last activity I think I want to quickly touch upon is the seed system and the crop breeding system. So KP province doesn't have its own strong breeding program. They rely on seeds or varieties that are produced mostly in Punjab. Climate is very different in those areas. So whatever yields high in Punjab, basically companies bring it to KP and they use it over there. So I think the two things in this activity are that we are going to support developing a speed breeding facility for the research, and then also develop a seed system in the province so that once a variety has been developed, there is a capacity to multiply that at a larger scale to the farmers, so they don't rely on other provinces. And I think just to wrap it up, one of the things I think we often, as project developers, I think we come across is retrofitting climate change assessment, which I think we are trying to avoid as much as we can, but sometimes it's unavoidable. And I think Matthias mentioned, you have to, it's not a straight process. Sometimes you have to consider political factors, so we are trying our best to sort of make sure that it's not a box ticking exercise, and I think traditionally it has been more like that, and as a project leader has to pass through different rooms. There's a lot of boxes to tick: environment, social safeguards, climate change. I think what we are now trying to do is when they are passing through this climate change room, we would like them to stay a bit longer and talk to us a bit longer, so that it's done properly. And I think another area is I would like to highlight is aligning. The government processes are often very different and to ADB processes. So when we are developing a project, of course we do all our assessments, but then when it goes to government, sometimes we, for example, this KP project, we developed it as a climate adaptation process, but when the project proposal was developed by the government, it didn't even include the climate assessment. So it wasn't part of their project development process. So I think we are now working with them. So how you can, I think this is a very important part. If we are developing a climate adaptation, then the government needs to integrate those. And I think there is a lot of, these ideas are being well received in Pakistan. Governments, both at federal as well as at provincial level, are now actively working in developing these processes similar to ADB. And I think once those are done, then it will be a lot more seamless process when we are developing these projects. And also, I think it'll be good to see more rigor in climate finance estimations, because like Yasmin said in the beginning, we committed to invest $1 billion on climate finance. But so there is we tend to count as much finance as climate finance as possible, but I think we are learning as we go that we need to be more conservative. And I think I heard recently that within ADB there is a lot of attention being paid on introducing audits, voluntary audits, so that we are accountable, self-accountable, and we keep correcting ourselves what we should count as climate finance and what we shouldn't, because it's a new area we are all learning. So I'll stop it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. His Jamali, for highlighting how upstream work are closely linked to the interventions in informing project design of an investment project in Pakistan. So before we proceed, let me take this opportunity to introduce myself as the next speaker for this session. I have the privilege of serving you as the moderator for today's session, but also as the next presenter in our agenda. So I am Leo Chris Palau. I have a Master's of Science degree in Environmental Science with extensive experience on using geospatial tools for map cropping systems, stress-prone environments such as flood, drought, and salinity intrusion, and climate risk hotspots to allow strategic implementation of interventions at the local level in Southeast Asian countries. Before joining ADB, my role in the International Center for Tropical Agriculture involves developing intelligent crop models using data science tools that can be used to provide seasonal crop advisory. My current role in ADB is to support climate-related operations. I serve as the focal for climate adaptation in the AFNR sector and Central and West Asia region for adaptation, while also supporting the wider adaptation agenda of ADB in other regions. So my presentation will cover our upstream work in supporting climate adaptation for the water and agriculture sector in the Amu Darya River Basin. So thank you, colleagues. Let me share with you some of the background, our work in Amu Darya. Some of the background context in the basin is that without adaptation measures to promote conservation, resource conservation, Uzbekistan may face shortages of water resources, increased desertification, land degradation, increased number of droughts, which may cause agricultural instability and food insecurity. Uzbekistan water flow relies mainly on two major rivers. Amu Darya River Basin contributes 2/3 of water resources, which is used for agriculture, domestic, industrial uses, and among others. However, there is a substantial evidence of water scarcity and risk, and this risk may increase in the future. This may further widen the water supply and demand gap in the country, further exacerbating food insecurity. In this context, a climate risk assessment was conducted in close collaboration with the Ministry of Water Resources to enhance river basin planning in Amu Darya River Basin, but also to identify relevant interventions that we can move forward and engage further with the government. The approach involves a combination of top-down and bottom-up approaches. The climate risk assessment was conducted in collaboration with various line ministries, with the Ministry of Water Resources leading the coordination. Climate hazards was mapped to identify future risk hotspots at high-resolution district-level units, which considers three components. Hazards, which is the H in this diagram, which refers to geophysical and extreme events that impact people or property, which includes floods, droughts, heat waves, landslide, and erosion. Exposure refers to location of assets and people which may be exposed to hazards. For example, agricultural area under irrigation, and number of population per square kilometer. And the vulnerability, it's a combination of sensitivity and adaptive capacity, which refers to the water stress and water productivity, high water and water demand in each district that was assessed for the vulnerability assessment. And a deep dive into the districts was done based on the climate risk hotspots. So once we identify the hotspots for climate risk, we did a deep dive in prioritized districts to better understand their adaptation and develop the initial portfolio of adaptation measures. The result of the climate risk mapping in the Amu Darya River Basin is shown on the map, following map for each hazards: drought, landslide, erosion, heat waves, and flood risk. The risk for each hazard was analyzed, and it was shown in the chart below and disaggregated into 5 ecozones: the upper ecozones, mid ecozone, riverine ecozone, lower ecozone, and the RLC. The classification of the ecozones was concurred by the Ministry of Water Resources. The magnitude of the bars indicated in the chart refers to the climate risk levels for each districts. Higher bars means higher hazards and higher hazard risk. Just to mention that the Ministry of Water Resources led consultations and validation of this risk mapping exercise with river basin and provincial authorities to validate the results. So we narrowed down to 3 priority areas informed by climate risk mapping and socioeconomic vulnerability analysis. These are in Kitab in Kashkadaria, Gurlan in Khoresm region, and Kanlikul in Karakal, Pakistan region. The risk drivers of the 3 districts were mainly heat stress in Kanlikul, drought in Gurlan, and multiple risk hazards in Kitab. The chart on the right side explains the process for developing the adaptation portfolio in each of the districts. So once the districts were identified, an in-depth survey was conducted to understand socioeconomic factors, climate impacts, and barriers for adaptation was assessed with experts and farmer cluster groups, including women and private sectors. That's the first steps once the district was identified. So, and we took this information from the survey and conducted a participatory consultation workshop and used the multi-criteria decision analysis to prioritize the adaptation measures. So 3 workshops was also conducted in these 3 prioritized districts. And then we consolidated the results from the 3 districts and presented this at the national level consultation workshop in Tashkent that was attended by several blind ministries to adjust, reformulate, and confirm the findings from the local level workshops, which is emphasizing the bottom-up approach of the assessment. And then follow-up consultations were also made. So after the national workshop, follow-up consultations were made to key ministry focals to confirm the adaptation measures. So findings from the risk assessment and consultations shows the following prioritized adaptation measures in Kanlikul district in Republic of Karakal, Pakistan. The measures include reconstruction of irrigation network and pump stations as an adaptation measure to reduce water loss and promote efficiency in water delivery to farms to compensate for the expected reduction in water. Create a new cropping systems that are resilient to salt, heat, and drought, and reconstruction or rehabilitation of existing water supply systems to reduce water loss and address system efficiency. In Kitab, prioritized adaptation measures was construction of multi-purpose reservoir for flood and mud flow regulation or protection, and increase water storage because of heat stress and also drought. Micro hydro was also mentioned during the consultations to decentralize power sources given water challenges. Conservation agriculture for water savings due to increased heat stress and erosion was also identified. Watershed management as an upstream activity to restore degraded land and forms a critical part of water management in any reservoir construction. So this is more of a holistic approach that's being packaged in Kitab. In Gurlan, implementation of modern techniques and technologies for soil cultivation, such as laser land leveling of field, use of flexible pipe and discrete irrigation for water efficiency, given increasing drought conditions, but also development of early warning and hydromet services tailored to agricultural advisories was also emphasized in Gurlan, but I think this hydromet services for agriculture will be relevant for all Uzbekistan. So aside from this infrastructure, rehabilitation, and some physical measures identified during the assessment, we also there are also soft components that being highlighted to support the implementation of these adaptation measures. One is developing a private-public partnership model. Uzbekistan have very few financial resources available for the water sector investments, and therefore promotion of PPP is identified as a strategy to complement this adaptation measures. Development of climate forecast system, from weather forecast, short, medium, seasonal forecast, long-range forecast, was also identified, and integrated this into a web platform for water resources monitoring and management, given climate variability and climate risk impacts expected in the country. Also, piloting of changing earth to concrete canals, and internal irrigation network, and changes to closed pipe system to reduce water loss. So these are some of the results from the upstream assessment that we can take forward in terms of engagement with the government. So just to, what are the lessons learned that we have from the assessment? Combining climate modeling is a very useful tool, but you need some of this participatory approach, bottom-up information, which makes it a powerful tool to develop locally relevant and evidence-based adaptation in Uzbekistan. Involvement of stakeholders in the process ensures early buy-in and co-ownership of investments. Ministry of Water Resources is engaged during the process, but as they lead the consultations, they lead the coordination with the other line ministries in the country. Of course, simplifying the steps approach to allow replication in other areas in Amu-Darya River Basin. So now we have prioritize 3 districts, but of course we want to extend this further to other districts in Uzbekistan. As a next steps for us, we would like to consult with the government counterparts on further extending the scope of the investment measures in additional geographic areas. Consult on next steps to package the investments. How do we want to sequence these projects? What are the financing modality, and how do we structure the implementation arrangements, given there's a cross-cutting sectors involved when you implement the whole portfolio of adaptation packages, and securing some of the technical assistance financing to prepare some of the projects included in the portfolio once there's a go signal from the government to proceed with the investment projects. Thank you very much. So I will continue because I'm as the moderator for this session. So thank you very much for all the speakers. For the audience who joined in person, thank you very much. I would like to request the speakers, if you can come in front for a question and answer portion of this session. So again, thank you very much. The floor is open for any questions that from the participants on this session.
I will take advantage here and go first. Thank you all for your presentations. I think they were really insightful and demonstrate the approach that you've been adopting to break away from the conventional way we looked at climate and coming up with these much more strategic approaches. So my question was, firstly, the socioeconomic surveys and that engagement with stakeholders, was that done for each of the countries that you've presented? And secondly, as a part of that, what were the specific areas that were touched upon in that socioeconomic survey, which may also be contributors to the climate risk context of communities? So maybe Kat, Matthias, and maybe Leo.
Well, in my case, Yasmin, for the Georgia case study, there was no socioeconomic survey that was conducted, but it's more of the risk assessment that we did for like the models that I've shared with you earlier. And then based on that, we consulted with the government and see if they are amenable to those results and to the suggestions. Like for instance, for the adaptation measures. But basically, in terms of, for instance, the impacts, we look into in terms of the like how it will affect the different areas, like the crop productivity, and also there are other aspects that we were not able to show on the screen, like for instance the hydropower plants. So basically looking into how climate projections will be affecting the performance of those points of interest. So yeah, but in terms of like survey, we didn't prepare a specific survey for that.
What we asked in Tajikistan was the perception of climate change impact on your daily life. So kind of straightforward question. Do you see something changing from last year, 10 years ago, 15 years ago? So that was very insightful. And then also more specifically what I'm mentioning, if there are any specific issues within the household, if women are particularly impacted by these changes, elderly, young people. So kind of like drilling down more that you would not get from kind of like a high level type of assessment, to really looking at within the household how it's impacting these kind of questions.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. For in Uzbekistan, it mostly belong to assessing what are the barriers for adaptation, what are the conditions that they experience, what are the living conditions that they have, and how what's their access to services, extension services, climate services, and other, what's their access to finance, and also what's the current impacts of climate change in their livelihood. So those are the issues that were asked during the socioeconomic survey, and then we brought that in we brought that information in preparing the consultation workshops in the 3 districts. So in the 3 districts, we presented some of the preliminary adaptation options that we think that might be relevant for them, and then the stakeholders will have the opportunity to maybe change it, reformulate it, saying this is not relevant. Maybe we should change it with more with this because this is the most needed in this district. So we have those process, and then once it is finished in the 3 districts, we consolidated the information and presented it to the national government that these are what your constituents at the local level needs for them to adapt to climate risk, and then they will also they can also have the opportunity to reconfirm, maybe reformulate a bit so it's aligned with their water sector priorities and their climate commitments. So, yeah.
I can add a very quick, just coming down to the project level. So that was national level. So I think when we were doing this KP project, we also did these socioeconomic surveys that also contributed to then climate change assessment. So for example, we did look at the climate and all of those factors, but we also asked people what their perception of climate is. and what kind of climate hazards they have experienced, and what was the severity and impact on them. And I think coming back to on the socio-economic side, apart from the usual questions we ask, education and all of that, we also went, because we wanted to inform our interventions, we also asked about their seed varieties they are using, where they are sourcing it from. Is it very certified? Is it just local? How old is it? Fertilizer, how much they are applying to the crops. And that gave us a very good idea that they were actually using less fertilizer than what was needed for the crop. And that's informed, that providing support for fertilizer and certified seed was a need. So I think that's some of the things we looked at.
If I may add, while I mentioned earlier that there was no socioeconomic survey, I think what's interesting in this was that because of the results, like for instance, which are consistent with for instance, the priorities of the government, how they perceive the challenges, the climate risks that they are experiencing, it was able to convince them that these are the priority interventions that they would be needing to address the socioeconomic risks. So it provided a very powerful tool for us to negotiate with them with more concrete analysis, data. Because like for instance, while as Matthias mentioned, this is a top-level analysis, mainly looking into the data from the statistics that they have from the government, but still the results were very consistent, and it really convinced them that they really have to act and really invest in these kinds of adaptation and resilience measures. So yeah.
Thank you. Yep. Yes, please. Thank you very much.
I think there was a bunch of other hands as well, but somehow I got the mic. Claudia Ringler from IFPRI. I've unfortunately only heard the last two presentations. So a question for Pakistan is if your climate change impact assessment considered glacier melt, because there will be a peak glacier melt and then the situation will look very different in Pakistan. And similar for Uzbekistan, we have the Kush-Tepa Canal, and your water scarcity assessment would look very different because Uzbekistan could lose another 20 to 30% of its surface water resources once a canal is effectively operating. So given these potentially much more extreme situations in both countries, and doing those consultations, maybe we also need to show some much more extreme scenarios, if you only have 10% of your former water resources, how do you think you would adapt? What can you still do? I think in both of those locations, this would be important. Maybe less in KP, but Sindh, etc., Punjab. So yeah, just would like to hear, because basically we are still, right, climate change is accelerating, plus we have everything else that's happening. So I think we need some more extreme scenarios and not just, this long-term slow climate change, because the actual decline in resources is likely much larger in those two countries at least.
Please, you want to come in first?
Yeah, so very good question, and totally agree. I think what my colleagues have just shown at the country level, what they are doing, I think we need to do that for Pakistan, to have that high-level assessment that it starts from the north, from the glaciers, goes down to Sindh, and how that impacts of glacier and how we are on the agriculture production systems in different places. So yes, we should do that. And as far as KP, this project is concerned, I don't think we went to that level, because it was more targeted on the flood-impacted areas, and we wanted to develop a project that was a part recovery and part future resilience, but on very targeted 7 districts. So in those, I think that aspect didn't come up as a significant one. But I think at the larger level, I totally agree we should. In fact, I'll be talking to my colleagues how they did it, so we should do something similar in Pakistan.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, thank you very much. In Uzbekistan, we mostly look at the historical observations of flood, drought, and some of these extreme risk events, and then use climate models to assess how will it progress into the future. We have some requests to do a more detailed hydrologic modeling to do the impact of the Kosh-Tepa Canal. But yeah, but we haven't done that in the assessment. But we see that in areas where it's already water stressed, having this canal built upstream will further put more stress in those already stressed areas. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I have one question on the Pakistan presentation. By the way, great session, very interesting presentation. And you mentioned that the project in Pakistan addressed both, somehow adaptation, but also mitigation. I understand the session is more about adaptation and resilience, but I think you mentioned about 10% of climate mitigation finance. And I was just wondering which activities were linked to this 10% of climate mitigation finance, and also if you see any opportunities to increase this climate mitigation work, possibly in combination with the climate adaptation work.
Yeah, so I think ideally we would have, I remember I think Matthias and Leo were involved in this project, and we wanted to, ideally we would like to see more of a balance for mitigation finance as well. The activities that sort of contributed to that finance mainly were, there were some in the government institutional preparedness side, we supported developing facilities, and those were solar powered. So that counts as mitigation. Then on the training, one of the first activities I was showing in the list was farmer trainings. And a lot of those activities were around optimizing fertilizer use and replacing it with, for example, composted manure and those kind of things. So those were another activity that counted towards mitigation. I think one of the hard parts in those kind of projects for mitigation is you can always advocate for it. You can't force a farmer to adopt. So you can do a lot of trainings about reducing or optimizing fertilizer use or promote using manure or some other biofertilizers, but it's up to farmer to take it. It's their call. So it's hard.
Thank you. Maybe for one last question before we wrap up the session.
Just last
Go for
question.
there.
Yeah, since Uzbekistan and Tajikistan are neighboring countries, and it's great to hear that this climate assessment has been done on these both countries. And I'm just wondering if you in the upstream, for example, in Tajikistan, you have discovered the risks which affect Uzbekistan and vice versa in Uzbekistan affecting Tajikistan in terms of climate change. Thank you.
It's for Matthias.
Thank you very much. Yes, to a certain extent. I mean, our main objective was to look at Tajikistan and its pipeline kind of like focus in the water balance that we have done. Obviously, that feeds into Uzbekistan, but we didn't particularly look into these kind of issues just because it was very much more of a national focus exercise. But I think under the CAREC water pillar, and Kat can say more on that, we are looking very specifically on those kind of transboundary water issues.
Thank you very much.
Leo, if I may
sorry.
just add, regarding the study, so for Uzbekistan, it's not specific to Uzbekistan, but it covers 5 countries in Central Asia. So a water assessment was done, similar to what I presented earlier. So I believe that kind of result will be able to guide the countries, the 5 countries, in identifying policies, transboundary policies that will help manage water resources properly. So the study, it is a scoping study for the water pillar. It's available online, so that's something that if you are interested.
Okay, thank you very much for the in-person participants and the speakers for this session. As we near the conclusion of our deep dive session, It is my privilege to introduce our Deputy Director General for Central and West Asia Department, Ms. Xiao Hong Yang, to deliver the closing remarks.
Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, I really wanted to thank everyone's active participation, especially the panelists and our excellent panelists who actually have come in their way to really put the water issue and to create this kind of project to really address the water issue. As you all know, climate change crisis is primarily a water crisis. So climate change is primarily a water issue. So we really need to put the water sector pillar at the center of the policymakers all the way to the project level and also household level to help the vulnerable communities, to help the sector to really look at what can we do as ADB to help to address the water issue. I think one slide struck me really very well is the Georgia slides look at where we are in 2030 and what we will do in 2050 if we don't have the project intervention, if we don't do anything, what will have happened? The water will actually dramatically reduce. So there will be a lot of issue even for a country like Georgia, let alone the water-stressed country like in Uzbekistan and also Pakistan. In Tajikistan, the ice melting is becoming really a glaciers melting becoming a big issue. With this, thank you everyone for your active participation and look forward to your active project intervention and then to address this really water pillar issue in Kara region. Thank you.
So with that, we are grateful for your participation, and the deep dive session is now closed. Thank you.